Going back to Not Enough Projects, we made good progress on the 2012 Equinox last time. This time we're going to tackle the exhaust system, get all the leaks squared away, and then we're going to be pulling the timing chain because I probably messed that up. So we're going to have to get that squared away before it's back on the road. Okay, so I'm guessing our exhaust leak is coming from the fact that I tightened this down before I finished snugging up the manifold to catalytic converter bolts. So I'm going to loosen this up and then we can snug up those top ones, and hopefully that'll draw up any of the gap that the leak is coming through. So sure enough, that's what was causing us trouble. I was able to tighten up all those studs up just a little bit now that the lower bolt was loosened up. I think I'm just gonna set the intake in place, or the airbox I guess you could call it, and then we'll start it up and check. Alright, the airbox is temporarily in place. Let's go start it up and see if it sounds better this time. I still hear a fair amount of exhaust noise. Let's see if we can pinpoint. Oh, I see it. I think the muffler might have a leak. I can see air pumping out of it. I don't hear it up here so much anymore. In fact, I don't hear it up here at all. Interesting. Maybe you guys can make out the smoke. There's just a little bit of condensation puffing out. Let's get over there and check it out. Sure enough, look at that. Muffler is rusted through. So we'll have to put a new one of those on. Not a huge deal. Alright guys, so we got it running what seems like normal and acceptably. It is throwing P0016 and P0017 codes for the exhaust and intake cam position sensors. So I'm wondering if maybe in installation somehow I messed up the timing chain. If it skipped a couple teeth or something. I don't know if I turned it opposite to rotation and somehow got it to skip teeth, but we may end up needing to pull the cam cover and also the timing cover and reset the timing, unfortunately. So yeah, to start off diagnosis, I am going to pull the cam cover off that way, or the valve cover, whatever you want to call it. That way we can turn it over to top dead center cylinder number 1. We can see what the cams are at, and if they're way off of what they look like they're supposed to be, then we will need to go further and reset the chain. Alright, so I guess this can be helpful to anybody who not only is a bonehead like me and makes stupid mistakes, but also who is a victim of the poor design of this engine. These just constantly eat timing chains from the factory. It should be the exact same procedure that I'm doing now if you're opening it up to replace a stretched timing chain for this same code. Now obviously if it's stretched far enough that valves are hitting, then you're gonna have to pull the head, but yeah. So we're just gonna start off by pulling this intake. It's just held on with a hose clamp down here onto the throttle body. Also this hose clamp. Pull this. To yank that out, you just push the clip. This is like the lock position. You just push this part out, pull it up all the way, and you should be able to just yank it off. Move it out of the way. Then for the coils, you have these white locks. You have to pull them back, and then you can press down the tab there to remove the connector. This one it's locking. I gotta get a new one from the junkyard or something. Not locking, it's missing. Now we're gonna remove the coils. They're just held in with 1 10mm bolt. So finally we should be able to start taking out all of the valve cover bolts. Now the valve cover should lift off. Obviously you want to make sure you don't have any gunk that's going to fall in there. This engine was just rebuilt, so it's clean. Did have a little bit of gunk that fell in there, unfortunately, so we will clean it out. Look how nice and clean it is. It's almost like it's only ran for like 5 minutes. Okay, for the time being, I'm going to place the trash bag over all of this just to keep anything from falling in. And I think it'll help us out a lot if we remove the air filter box. Do have to remove the MAF connector. Now we can see our timing marks on the cams much easier. So I think now we're going to rotate the motor over to top dead center, cylinder number 1, so that we can get kind of an idea of where we're at, timing wise. Alright, so to do this, I'm going to pop out cylinder number 1 spark plug. There we are. Looks like it was running rich there for a little bit. See how rich it is. Carboned up. Okay, we'll set that aside. Okay, so now we're going to need to use a 21mm socket to get onto the crank bolt and rotate the engine over until we feel the compression stroke starting on the cylinder number 1 spark plug hole. We'll feel the air rushing out. Once the compression stroke starts, we're going to stick a long screwdriver in there, and we're just going to rotate it until the screwdriver reaches its maximum. Now there's a little bit of a dwell point in all piston engines because you have a circular rotation of the crankshaft getting converted into a linear stroke. So as the piston reaches top dead center, there's a little space called the dwell point where it either moves up or down, but the crank still rotates a little bit. Usually it's just a few degrees, a couple degrees. So ideally you want to be centered in that dwell point. So this isn't obviously wrong. You can see the 2 gold marks here, which it's very rare that these gold marks will actually line up with the marks like how we set them up, because each link doesn't stay with a specific tooth. It rotates at a different rate than the teeth, if that makes sense. Anyways, the gold teeth are about, I think it's 1, 2, 3, 4. Counting the gold links, there's 16 apart from each other, so counting from here, it's 16 teeth. So the cams haven't slipped teeth relative to each other. Now, that's not saying that the crank sprocket slipped the tooth off or anything like that. Now, we're pretty close to top dead center. We could be off by a degree or 2 because it's just hard to say with the screwdriver. You have to go back and forth kind of to find the middle of the dwell point, which we didn't. So we're probably a little past top dead center, and there's no timing mark for the crank as far as I'm aware. So we could be off a little bit on that, but it's not obviously wrong. This is about the correct position of the cams. So if we're off, it's only by a tooth, I think. But, I mean, given that it's throwing the code, I mean, we're going to have to probably pull the timing cover and check. So yeah, I guess we're just going to start doing that. To do the timing cover off, we are going to need to take the motor off this front motor mount, I believe. So to do that, we're going to need to support the engine from the bottom. I'm going to use a jack on the oil pan. Also, I went ahead and took the wheel off. We're going to remove this cover so that we can get to the crank and to some of the timing cover bolts. This really shouldn't be too bad from what I'm seeing. I'm not following any procedure or anything. This is just, you know, it should be fairly clear what needs to go and what doesn't. So these 3 are 15s. I'm going to leave them threaded just partially in case the engine is not supported very well. Okay, looks like we're good. The body bolts are 18s. Nuts they are, actually. Okay, that gained us a little bit more access. We'll probably want to take off this motor mount adapter, I don't know, whatever you call it, bracket, I guess, just so that we get a little bit more access. Let's do that. These are 18s as well. Got one more way down there that the ratchet is not going to fit in between the frame rail and the bracket, so we'll probably need the wrench. Okay, here we go. I think I got it loose. There we are. Now we're going to take off the accessory belt tensioner, but actually first, before we do that, we need to take off the belt, obviously. Just a 3/8 hex. your normal 3/8 socket will fit into it, and you do it like you're loosening a bolt. Doesn't look like our ratchet's gonna fit in there. Wrench time. Okay, belt tensioner off. Now we have to pop off the crank pulley, so we're going to use the impact on that. To get easy access to the crank, I am going to pop off the access cover here. Generally on these things, you have to pop out the center thing. And luckily this car had a big oil leak in the front before I worked on it, so these are well lubricated, I guess. So that pops out. And hopefully you can remove this without ruining them. I don't have a good track record with it. It actually looks okay. Looks like there's only 2 of them. I'm sure there's special pliers for these. And also sometimes panel clip pliers can help. But you can make do, that's for sure. Cool, now we have easy access to the crank bolt here. It's a 21mm, and unfortunately it is torque to yield, so we're gonna have to replace it. But it is what it is. Have fun doing this if you don't have an impact. If you don't, I would just buy one, or see if you can borrow one, because it's not fun if you don't have one. There's our brand new bolt that is no longer usable. And off comes the crank pulley. Okay, now we should be able to get the timing cover off. It's just got all these 10mm bolts on the perimeter. I'll count them as I take them out and let you guys know how many. Alright, I had to stop because it started raining pretty hard, but it finally let up. I got all the bolts out, I think, so let's go ahead and try to pop this off. There's a little tab over by the alternator. Okay, so I think I got all the bolts out. Now we're just gonna use a pry bar here. There's a little pry tab by the alternator. You can see it came off super easy because it was just put on. So just in case it helps anybody, we're dealing with 10 of these 10mm bolts, and then there's one 13mm long bolt that goes through kind of the center-ish area. Once you have all those out, it comes off pretty easy. There are alignment dowels that hold it in place, so you gotta pop it off of those. Get the asses out of the way. There we go. Okay, here's our cover. Set it in a safe place where it's not going to get all dirty. Okay, now we can get the whole picture of what we're dealing with here. So you can see, there's the chains. So there's the dot that you would put the colored chain on when you time it. So it looks like the crank mark I'm counting with this, we are 1, 2, 3, 4 away from the mark. I don't know if this is going to be an accurate way of doing it, but we'll see. So 4 away from the mark down here. Up top we are 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, I'm covering. We are 1, 2, 3, 4 away from the timing mark. So that actually seems okay. Interesting. And from this one we are 1, 2, 3, 4 away. Okay, that doesn't actually seem wrong. Okay, I'm gonna do some thinking on this, and I'll get back with you guys once I figure it out. Alright guys, I found it. Feel kind of like an idiot, but it turns out on these direct injection motors, there's a thin metal washer that goes in front of the cam gear. Now this mark right here that I went off of, that's actually just a casting mark. We're a tooth off, look at that. You see that? There's no way this isn't a common problem. I'm sure it's gotten lots of people. I mean, that doesn't make me feel any better. I still feel like an idiot, but feel free to make fun of me in the comments. Helps with the algorithm, right? Okay, well, I'm glad we found it. And I'm glad it's only a tooth off. So, yeah, I mean, we're going to have to pop the tensioner out and see if we can get the chain over. I don't think we're going to be able to do it without taking the VVT sprockets off, but we'll see. Alright guys, I gotta say, I'm pretty happy that we found that. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not happy that I did it or that I have to fix it now, but it's always a good feeling to figure out what's wrong, especially when it's a definitive answer. So what I'm going to do now is pop out the tensioner. It's a 32 millimeter, and it's over here behind the head. I'll show it to you guys after. Okay, here it is. We're going to have to go through the reset procedure on it. That's okay. Set it aside for now. Whether it's going to be possible to shift the timing link without removing one of the cam phasers, but it is not looking like it based on how tight everything is, even with the tension removed. Definitely need to remove a cam phaser. That's okay. So let's get this stuff out of the way. Alright, so first I'm going to remove the upper chain guide right here. Alright, now we're going to need to remove one of the cam phasers. Alright, with the guide out of place, now we can go ahead and remove the VVT sprocket bolt, an 18 millimeter. And you can see there's a hex on the cam that we can fight against. These are pretty tight. Oh, I think I'm gonna need a breaker bar. Anyway, I didn't mention it earlier, these bolts are torqued. So we're gonna have to replace them. Well, hopefully we can get away with just doing this one. That would be ideal, but it will need replaced, just like the crank bolt. Unfortunately, but it is what it is. Now the exhaust cam is under a little bit of tension. Let's see how much it wants to go. T-sprocket off. Now we are free to move the chain as we please. So just like, and if you want a really good picture of this, look back at the video I did of doing the timing on an engine stand. Obviously the crank mark I lined up incorrectly, but the rest of it is sound. So as long as you follow the true crank marker, you should be fine. So what we're gonna do is these two gold marks on the chain that are close to each other. This one, if we can get it to go. This one gold mark is going to go on the arrow of this cam actuator. The other gold mark obviously is going to go onto the intake arrow, and then we're going to shift the crank chain over one tooth. In fact, let's do that now. Okay, so down here you can see all this chain slack. Hopefully, don't need to take off the chain guide, but we may need to. In fact, it's looking like we will. Okay, so we're just going to pop this 10 millimeter headed bolt. That just holds the, well actually, let's see. Nope, we don't need to. Awesome. Makes it easier. Let's get this out of the way. We'll want to make sure we put that on. It's just a little spacer. Looks like we've got to go one more tooth. And we need to pull a little bit more slack from over here. Now that we've got it. Just like that. So now back down here. There we go. Got enough slack, hopefully. There we go. So this mark is the actual timing mark. We were doing it right here. One tooth off. Which, who would have guessed that would cause problems? Okay, so now we know the crank mark is correct. Let's come up here. Get the gold link onto the arrow. Just like so. Now we can get the intake cam actuator back in place. And for now I'm just going to use this bolt to hold it in place. I'm going to make sure that the crank mark is still lined up, which it is. Now we might need to mess with the intake can for a little bit. I highly recommend you check out the video where I did the timing on this stand if you're doing this also, in addition to this video. Now we've got it on the notch. We're going to get this bolt just run down enough that it won't fall out of place. Now we just double check that all the marks line up. Intake, good. Exhaust, good. Crank, good. And you can see all the slack is on this side, which is what we want. So we're looking really good. Now we can go ahead, reset our tensioner, and then we can get it put back in its hole so that it takes up the chain slack. According to the factory service manual, we need to remove this snap ring. You can see it down there. So we're using snap ring pliers. Looks like it's going to be a little fiddly. Bring it back when I... Alright, finally got it out. The snap ring fought quite a bit. One little trick I found useful that I've used in the past is you compress your snap ring, and the problem for me was that the pliers kept slipping off before I could actually yank it up. So what I did is I compressed it enough to get a small flathead screwdriver between the snap ring and its groove, pried it up, and just worked it out of there. So I don't know if that'll help you, but help me. So according to the service manual, so I believe you take this spring, you rotate it as you push down. Yeah, just like that. Okay. And then we need to get it over into this groove. So we're pushing down and rotating so that the detent gets all the way up into this groove. Let's see if I can do it by hand. Now ideally you would probably do this in a vise. That would make it easier, but I don't have one set up right now. Close that time. There we go. Whew. Took a lot of force. Probably got some hitchhiker thumb now. It's okay. Okay, now that's locked in position, so we can... So this, before I do that, this is kind of an interesting design, because you have a... Well, I mean, it's not really that interesting, but it's a design that's probably used in a similar way by a lot of manufacturers. So you have this spring, and you can see all those different detents that the spring can lock onto. That doesn't provide enough tension to actually keep the chain in place. So you have an oil feed hole down there that you can see. So oil pressure, you know, when the engine is running, can get up to, I don't know, 60 psi when it's cold. So that 60 psi of pressure is going into this body, and it's pushing up against the O-ring. So it's pushing the tensioner out like that. And as the tensioner goes out, the spring, which is weak, you can see I can push it in with my hand, is able to push out far enough that it can go on to the next click. When without the hydraulic pressure, it normally would not be able to push the chain that far to get onto the next click. So it's like a dual spring system, I guess you could say. You got a hydraulic spring and a mechanical spring, or whatever you want to call it. So kind of a cool design. Let me get the snap ring back in place. Hopefully this won't fight us as much going back in. Yeah, we're good. Okay, and you want to make sure that the snap ring is in its groove all the way around. That's definitely not something you want coming out. We're looking good. So, now our chain tensioner is reset. I went ahead and ordered a new cam bolt. Amazingly, Amazon had it for next day delivery, so we'll have that tomorrow afternoon. And we'll get this cam VVT actuator bolted down properly. And then we'll get the tensioner in. So I think I'm going to call it for tonight. But tomorrow, we should be able to get this fired up. Alright, we've got a new bolt. So let's run the old one out. I did lightly coat this with oil, both on the threads and on the other side of the head, just so we get an accurate torque measurement. Not that it's super critical, since this is a torque to yield bolt. It's kind of part of the whole point of it. Okay, with that finger tight, now I'm going to put in the tensioner that we reset. Okay, using our 32mm socket, we're going to torque this up to 55 foot-pounds. Alright, I double checked all of our timing marks and we're still good. So Then use this wooden valve to push on the tensioner guide and get the tensioner to unlock. Okay, that should have done it. Okay, so now we're going to torque the intake cam bolt to 22 foot-pounds and then an additional 22 degrees, not 22 degrees, 100 degrees. Using a 15/16 wrench here to hold the cam in place. Now I'm going to wind this way up so it doesn't click while we're doing the angle torque. It's really windy out, hopefully it's not ruining the audio. I'm also going to mark the 12 o'clock position on the bolt, just so we can get an idea roughly of how far we've turned it. Okay, that's 100 there. And we can see the mark I just made is roughly in line with the mark on the other bolt. So that's just a good sanity check. Alright, so now we've just basically got reassembly. I think I'm just going to speed through it because it's exactly the opposite of removal. If you want a nice detailed video with all the torque values and everything, check out the one where I did the timing on the engine stand. Everything in that video is applicable here, obviously, same engine, same car, except it's a little harder to film while it's in the car. So yeah, I'm gonna get to it. Okay, so I am gonna reuse the old crank bolt just temporarily. I have a new one on order, but it's gonna take a few days to get here. I'm just gonna use it enough to test and verify that we fixed the problem. So I'm not actually going to do the proper torque sequence, I'm just going to get it nice and tight. Alright, that should be good. Okay, I went ahead and cleared the codes, let's start it up. Seems to be running okay. I am going to have to stop the recording so I can check the codes, see if there's any pending codes for cam crank correlation. So I'll get back with you guys. Alright, so the P0016 and P0017 faults are gone. So I think for now I'll just have to wait till we get that new crank bolt so I can get that torque down properly. And then we can take this out on the road and do some testing on it. Yeah, it stops. That's good. It is a little loud with that muffler, but that's an easy fix. It's not even welded on, I saw. It's just got clamps, so that'll be a very easy fix. So here's the muffler. You can see this side is clamped. You can see where it's